children, how are you? I hope you all are studying well. So children, aren't the chapters of English interesting? They are indeed. They tell us about so many different things, isn't it? So children, in this chapter called the Book of Flowers, we're going to learn something about the nature and also about friendship. So let's see what's there in this chapter for us to learn. Prologue. It says, this story talks about an old British spinster. Okay, spinster is a person who is not married, okay, Mrs. Mackenzie, and tells how she forms an accidental friendship with a young schoolboy. The schoolboy's visit becomes something she looks forward to until one day it is time for him to go on vacation. That's when she gives him something that is very dear to her. So children, do you have such friends who are so close to you that you, without thinking, you give them something which is very dear to you? Yes, sometimes we do that. हम लोग अपने दोस्तों के साथ हमेशा वो चीज़ें शेयर करते, especially उन दोस्तों के साथ जो हमारे बहुत करीब है ना? चलो, let's see what this story is about. But before that, let's do a warm-up. Why are some people absolutely fascinated by nature? They have a sense of wonder about why things are as they are, while the majority of people are oblivious and uninterested. Discuss. So children, ऐसे बहुत से लोग हैं जिनको नेचर से या नेचर की कोई भी चीज़ हो, जैसे एनिमल्स भी हो जाए, प्लांट्स हो जाए, उनसे बहुत ज़्यादा लगाव होता है. So on the other hand, there are people who may not be interested in it. So discuss about it and see whether you are those types who love the nature and love to talk about it, or just you accept it the way it is. Alright? So let's read this chapter. Alright. The Oaks, Hunter's Lodge, the Parsonage, the Pines, Dumbarton, Mackinnon's Hall and Windermere. These are names of some of the old houses that still stand on the outskirts of one of the smaller Indian hill stations. They were built over 100 years ago by British settlers who sought relief from the searing heat of the plains. Most have fallen into decay and are now inhabited by wild cats, owls, goats, and the occasional mule drivers. But among these neglected mansions stands a neat, whitewashed cottage, Mulberry Lodge, and in it lived an elderly British spinster named Miss Mackenzie. She was well over 80, but no one would have guessed it. She was sprightly and wore old-fashioned but well-preserved dresses. Once a week she walked to town and bought butter, jam, soap and sometimes a bottle of eau de cologne. So in this story we are going to talk about Miss Mackenzie, okay, जिसका एक इंडिया के हिल स्टेशन पे अपना खुद का मैंशन है. तो ब्रिटिशर्स के ज़माने में क्या होता था, they used to, in order to beat the heat, like we do, we go on a vacation to the hill stations. Likewise, they also used to go on the hill station and some of them have built their own houses. So काफ़ी सारे houses हैं ऐसे जो mansions हैं जिनको maintain नहीं किया गया and Britishers left, okay. So they are just left like that only, okay. But there is this particular mansion which belongs to Miss Mackenzie. Okay, who is around 80 years of age, but उसको देख के कोई बोलेगा ही नहीं कि वो 80 साल की है. She is so well dressed, वो पुराने ज़माने की but सुंदर कपड़े पहनती है, okay. And हमेशा once a week she goes to the market to buy her grocery and maybe her butter, jam, soap and other items, and sometimes also a bottle of eau de cologne, okay. So Miss Mackenzie had lived there since her teens. Before World War I, her parents, brother and sister were dead. She had no relatives in India and lived on a small pension and gift parcels sent from her childhood friend. She had few visitors, the local priest, the postman, the milkman. Like other lonely old people, she kept a pet, a large black cat with bright yellow eyes. So, ये जो Miss Mackenzie थी, वो इंडिया में World War I से रह रही थी when she was a teenager. अब उसके parents, उसके भाई बहन, they are no longer there in this world. So at the same time उसके कोई भी इंडिया में relatives भी नहीं है. और वो क्या करती है, वो रहती है छोटे से पेंशन पे, और जो उसके गिफ्ट पार्सल्स उसके चाइल्डहुड फ्रेंड्स भेजते हैं उस पे शी इज़ सर्वाइविंग, ओके। और लाइक यू नो जनरली ओल्ड लोगों को आप देखोगे, दे ऑलवेज हैव अ पेट विद देम. So similarly, even she has a pet, which is a pet cat. All right. In a small garden, she grew dahlias, chrysanthemums, gladioli, and a few rare orchids. She knew a great deal about wildflowers, trees, birds, and insects. She never seriously studied them, but had an intimacy with all that grew and flourished around her. So, if you look at the hill stations, okay, hill stations में आप क्या देखते हो? Generally, it's so beautiful, and you see variety of flowers. वैसे ही मिस मैकेंजी was always fascinated by flowers क्योंकि she was surrounded by all these wild flowers. At the same time, she had also planted a lot of flowers in her own garden as well. So it was September and the rains were nearly over. Miss Mackenzie's African marigolds were blooming. She hoped the coming winter wouldn't be too severe because she found it increasingly difficult to bear the cold. क्योंकि जैसे जैसे एज हो जाता है, all these old people, उनका जो कोल्ड विंटर बेयर करने का जो एक ये होता है ना, क्या कहते हैं, शक्ति होती है, it starts reducing bit. Okay, so she was afraid that I hope that the winters are not very harsh or severe. One day, as she was puttering about in her garden, she saw a schoolboy plucking wildflowers on the slope above the cottage. "What are you up to, young man?" she called. Alarmed, the boy tried to dash up the hillside but slipped on the pine needles and slid down the slope into Miss Mackenzie's nasturtium bed. Finding no escape, he gave a bright smile and said, "Good morning, miss." So, ऐसे ही वो गार्डन में खड़ी रह के अपने आप बातें कर रही थी तो अचानक से उसकी नज़र पड़ती है एक छोटे से बच्चे पे, स्कूल बॉय पे, who is trying to pluck the wild flowers. तो अचानक वो देख के वो पूछती है कि क्या कर रहे हो, what are you up to? So, तो मतलब वो लड़का थोड़ा डर जाता है. And then if you know that on the hills, generally what are there? There are pine trees. So he slips down the pine needles and he falls into the Miss Mackenzie's का जो farm होता है, field, वहाँ पे वो गिर जाता है. तो वो डर के बस कुछ एक स्माइल देके उसको बोलता है, "Good morning, miss." So he attended the local English medium school and wore a blazer and a tie. Like most polite schoolboys, he called every woman miss. "Good morning," said Miss Mackenzie severely. "Would you mind moving out of my flower bed?" The boy stepped gingerly over the nasturtiums and looked at Miss Mackenzie with appealing eyes. "You ought to be in school," she said. "What are you doing here?" So he was a very polite child, काफ़ी अच्छा बच्चा था एकदम, और जैसे बाकी बच्चे बड़े लोगों को देख के मिस कहते थे, ये also he used to greet everyone with a smile and call them miss. तो अब मिस मैकेंजी जो होती है वो उसको बोलती है कि क्या तुम मेरे फ्लावर बेड पे जो गिरे हो थोड़ा हटोगे. तो then he moves from there and you know she asked him like you know कि तुम यहाँ पे क्या कर रहे हो, why are you not in the school? So he said that picking flowers, miss. He held up a bunch of ferns and wildflowers. Oh, Miss Mackenzie was disarmed. It had been a long time since she had seen someone taking an interest in her flowers. "Do you like flowers?" she asked. "Yes, miss. I'm going to be a botanist." So she asked, like, "You mean a botanist?" "Yes, miss. That's unusual. Do you know the names of these flowers?" "No, miss." "This is a buttercup," said Miss Mackenzie, "and those purple flowers are salvia. Do you have any books on flowers?" So ऐसे उसका conversation शुरू हो जाता है उसके साथ, और वो पूछती तुम यहाँ पे क्या कर रहे, तो कहता है कि I have come here to pick flowers. तो उसको पूछती है कि तुम why I have never seen someone so interested in flowers anymore. तो कहता है मुझे बड़े होने के बाद, he could not say the word botanist, he says botanist, you know, that is the word he uses. So she realizes that he wants to become a botanist. Okay, botanists are people who study the flowers and all and the leaves and all, they study plants in general. So तो अब वो उसको बोलती कि अच्छा, तो फिर देन शी स्टार्ट्स इंट्रोड्यूसिंग हिम टू द डिफरेंट फ्लावर्स, एंड देन यू नो उसको पूछती है कि क्या तुम्हारे पास फ्लावर्स के ऊपर कोई बुक है. सो ही सेज, "नो मिस." So she says, come in and I'll show you one. ऐसे बोल के she takes him inside her house. Alright. So now children, just crack this performance tracker quickly before we move ahead with the following chapter. Alright. Now, she led the boy into a small front room crowded with furnitures, books, vases and jam jars. What's your name? Asked Miss Mackenzie as she rummaged through her books. Anil, miss. And where do you live? When school closes, I go to Delhi. My father has a business there. Oh, and what's that? Bulbs. Miss, flower bulbs? No, electric bulbs. Ah, here we are, she said, taking a heavy volume from the shelf. Flora Himalayensis, published in 1892 and probably the only copy in India. This is a valuable book, Anil, and no other naturalist has recorded as many wild Himalayan flowers. But there are still many flowers unknown to the botanists who spend all their time using microscopes instead of in the mountains. Perhaps you will do something about that one day. So she takes him inside or generally she starts asking him question. पूछती है कि तुम्हारा नाम क्या है, तुम कहाँ से हो, ये सारे सवाल पूछती है और अपने शेल्फ में से एक बड़ी सी बुक निकालती है जिसका नाम होता है फ्लोरा हिमालयंसिस और कहती है कि ये 1892 में पब्लिश हुई थी और ऐसी कोई भी कॉपी नहीं है जो which is like more better than this one. It is one of a kind और इसमें काफ़ी सारे हिमालयन फ्लावर्स के बारे में इंफॉर्मेशन है. तो कहती हैं आजकल के जो बॉटनिस्ट होते हैं इंस्टेड ऑफ गोइंग इनटू द नेचर एंड फाइंडिंग फ्लावर्स एंड रिसर्चिंग ओवर देम, वो कहती है कि आजकल तो ये माइक्रोस्कोप से ही या अपनी पढ़ाई कर लेते हैं इंस्टेड ऑफ गोइंग इनटू द माउंटेन्स. So she says कि I hope that you will change this trend one day. So he says, yes, miss. She lit the stove and put the kettle on for tea. And then the old English lady and the small Indian boy sat side by side, absorbed in the book. Miss Mackenzie pointed out many flowers that grew around the hill station, while the boy made a mental note of their names and seasons in which they grew. May I come again? Asked Anil when finally he rose to go. If you like, said Miss Mackenzie, but not during school hours. You mustn't miss your classes. So these two became friends automatically. They started reading that book, going through the book, and both of them were taking equal interest. तो अनिल कहता है कि मैम क्या मैं वापस आ सकता हूँ, मिस क्या मैं आपके घर पे वापस आ सकता हूँ? वो कहती है श्योर, बट नॉट ड्यूरिंग द स्कूल आवर्स. स्कूल छोड़ के नहीं आना है. So after that, Anil visited Miss Mackenzie about once a week and nearly always brought a wild flower for her to identify. She looked forward to the boy's visit. Sometimes when more than a week passed and he hadn't come, she would grumble to the cat. So अब वो हर हफ्ते में एक दिन उसको आने की आदत लग जाती है और वो आते आते एक वाइल्ड फ्लावर लेके आता था और मिस मैकेंजी को दिखा के उसके बारे में पूछता था कि ये कौन सा फ्लावर है एंड दे यूज्ड टू डिस्कस अबाउट इट. तो अब कभी हफ्ते में वो आता नहीं था तो मिस मैकेंजी अपनी कैट के साथ बैठ के ग्रम्बल करती रहती थी. So by the middle of October, with only a fortnight left before the school closed, snow fell on the distant mountains. One peak stood high above the others, a white pinnacle against an azure sky. When the sun set, the peak turned from orange to pink to red. How high is that mountain? Asked Anil. It must be over 12,000 feet, said Miss Mackenzie. I always wanted to go there, but there is no proper road. At the height, there will be flowers that you don't get here. Blue gentian, purple columbine. Okay. The day before the school closed, Anil came to say goodbye. As he was about to leave, Miss Mackenzie thrust the Flora Himalayensis into his hands. It's so valuable, he said. That's why I'm giving it to you. Otherwise, it will fall into the hands of the junk dealers. But, miss, don't argue. The boy tucked the book under his arm, stood at attention, and said, Goodbye, Miss Mackenzie. It was the first time he had spoken her name. So, ये जो लड़का है उसको आदत सी हो जाती है, वहाँ पे विजिट करता है। अब मिड अक्टूबर के करीबन उसने, मतलब स्कूल क्लोज होने के लिए कुछ 15 दिन बाकी थे, तब वो ऐसे डिस्टेंस में, बिकॉज दे आर स्टेइंग ऑन हिल स्टेशंस, दे कुड सी द हिमालयन रेंज और मे बी द माउंटेन रेंज। तो वहाँ पे स्नोफॉल शुरू हो गई थी। तो जैसे जैसे स्नोफॉल शुरू हो जाती है, द स्काई ऑल्सो चेंज, दे चेंज फ्रॉम द ऑरेंज टू पिंक टू रेड। सो अलग अलग माउंट स्काई के भी अलग अलग रंग देखने को मिलते हैं। सो ये दीज बोथ वर डिस्कसिंग अबाउट द माउंटेन, अबाउट द स्काई एंड ऑल। तो वो बोलता है कि मैम मिस, वो माउंटेन कितना ऊंचा होगा? तो कहते हैं मे बी अराउंड 12,000 फीट। सो ही सेज कि शायद उस माउंटेन पे बहुत सारे फ्लावर्स होंगे। So she also says, yes, I always wanted to go there. मुझे हमेशा से वहाँ पे जाना था, बट वहाँ पे जाने के लिए कोई प्रॉपर रास्ता नहीं है। ओके, सो वहाँ पे बहुत सारे फ्लावर्स भी होंगे, जैसे ब्लू जेंटाइन होगा, पर्पल कॉलम्बाइन होगा, तो ऐसे ही उनके डिस्कशंस फ्लावर्स के बारे में चलते रहते थे। और अब टाइम आ गया था जब अनिल को दिल्ली जाना था, because his school was closing. So as he was about to leave, Miss Mackenzie क्या करती है, उसके हाथ में फ्लोरा हिमालयंसिस पकड़ा देती है। तो कहते हैं नहीं, बट ये तो काफ़ी वैल्यूएबल है, आप मुझे क्यों दे रहे हो? तो कहते हैं अगर तुम नहीं इसको रखोगे तो ये तो जाएगी जंक डीलर्स के हाथ में, कबाड़ी के हाथ में चली जाएगी। सो शी सेज डू नॉट आर्ग्यू एंड कीप द बुक। ओके, तो वो बुक लेके निकल जाता है वहाँ से, एंड सेज गुड बाय मिस मैकेंजी एंड ही लीव्स फ्रॉम देयर। सो स्ट्रॉन्ग winds soon brought rain and sleet, killing the flowers in the garden. The cat stayed indoors, curled up at the foot of the bed. Miss Mackenzie wrapped herself in shawls and mufflers, but still felt cold. Her fingers grew so stiff that it took almost an hour to open a can of baked beans. Then it snowed, and for several days the milkman did not come. Tired, she spent most of her time in bed. It was the warmest place. She kept a hot water bottle against her back, and the cat kept her feet warm. She dreamed of spring and summer. In 3 months, the primroses would be out, and Anil would return. So, अनिल तो वहाँ से चला गया, and the winter started settling in. तो उसकी वजह से Miss Mackenzie, as it is, she was feeling very cold. So उसको थोड़ा winter bear करना मुश्किल हो रहा था, and milkman was also not coming. So she used to be most of the time bed पे ही रहती थी, and because उसको लगता था bed पे she is pretty warm. हॉट वाटर बॉटल लेके अपने पीठ के नीचे टक करती थी, और कैट यूज्ड टू लिक हर फीट एंड कीप हर वार्म। सो सपने में भी वो हमेशा फ्लावर्स के बारे में सोचती थी, स्प्रिंग के बारे में सोचती थी, और कहती थी समर आएगा, स्प्रिंग आएंगे, प्रिमरोजेस आ जाएंगे, और अनिल भी वापस आ जाएगा। So one night the hot water bottle burst, soaking the bed. The sun didn't shine for several days, and the blankets remained damp. Miss Mackenzie caught a chill and had to keep to her cold, uncomfortable bed. A strong wind sprang up one night and blew the bedroom window open. Miss Mackenzie was too weak to get up and close it. The wind swept the rain and sleet into the room. The cat snuggled close to its mistress's body. Towards morning, the body lost its warmth and the cat left the bed. So, जैसे एक दिन वो जो हॉट वाटर की जो थैली होती है वो फट जाती है, ओके, एंड द बेड बिकम्स वेट। तो अब बिकॉज धूप ही नहीं आ रही थी, ठंड बढ़ती जा रही थी, एंड मिस मैकेंजी हैड नो चॉइस बट टू ले ऑन द कोल्ड बेड। सो एक दिन ऐसा हो जाता है कि जो हवा से उनका जो बेडरूम का डोर होता है वो ही खुल जाता है, ओके, एंड इट बिकम्स वेरी कोल्ड। सो टुवर्ड्स मॉर्निंग बॉडी लॉस्ट इट्स वार्मथ, उनकी जो बॉडी की गर्मी थी वही खत्म हो गई, एंड द कैट लेफ्ट द बेड. As sunlight streamed through the window, the milkman arrived. He poured some milk into the saucer on the doorstep, and the cat jumped down from the window sill. The milkman called a greeting to Miss Mackenzie. There was no answer. Knowing she was always up before sunrise, he poked his head through the open window and called again. Miss Mackenzie did not answer. She had gone to the mountains where the blue gentians and the purple columbine grew. The story is written by Ruskin Bond. So, as I said, कि उसको ठंड की वजह से she could not survive okay, and she passed away. तो दूसरे दिन जब milkman आता है, door पे knock कर देता है, there is no answer, and he realizes that she is no more, and she's gone, to the mountains in the company of blue gentians and purple columbine. So this is such a beautiful story कि जैसे उसने एक छोटे बच्चे के साथ दोस्ती की and she shared the most valuable thing that she had in her life. She found someone who could talk to her with regards to what she loved the most. So children, हमारे भी लाइफ में ऐसे दोस्त आते हैं या बड़े लोग भी ऐसे हो जाते हैं जिनके हम काफ़ी करीब हो जाते हैं. So this is such a wonderful example of pure friendship and love for nature, isn't it? So children, reread this story, look at the difficult words, their meanings, and practice the spellings as well. And don't forget to do the back exercises.